Indianapolis Metropolitan Police announced a major break in a nearly 50-year-old cold case that involved 3 hitchhiking girls and one man who detectives at the time said was hunting. The elusive suspect behind the horrific attacks on the young girls in a field was revealed during a news conference, providing an answer to the investigation decades after it horrified the city. Thomas Edward Williams, dubbed the Slasher by police and the victims, died at age 49 in November 1983 inside a prison in Galveston, Texas. At the time of the abduction, Williams lived near the site of the kidnapping. In 1975, 3 girls trying to reach an amusement center hitchhiked along the 800 block of East Washington Street when a man picked them up. They soon realized something was wrong when the front passenger door was missing an inside door handle. The man, suspected to be in his 40s, drove the girls past the teen hangout and continued east into Hancock County, eventually heading off a county road and into a cornfield. There, he raped the youngest girl, 11 years old at the time, stabbed her 3 times in the throat, and another 15 times in her chest. He then slashed the throats of the 13-year-old and 14-year-old and left them all for dead. I heard him wrestling around, the car door shut, and the car start. The oldest victim stated during an interview in February 2018, "I was trying to see which way he was going to go because I wanted to get the heck out of there, and 13-year-old grabbed my leg, and it scared me so I fell down. I didn't know which way he went." The 2 couldn't find the youngest victim, who was the oldest victim's sister. The man had dragged her further back into the field. The oldest 2 girls said they thought he took her. "He picked me up and tossed me into the cornfield," the youngest victim said. She then passed out. The 2 oldest victims crawled out of the field and onto US 40 in an attempt to wave down help. 3 men pulled over to pick them up, took them to a motel, and phoned authorities. One officer, who arrived first on the motel scene, compared the cuts to the girls' necks as appearing similar to that of an accordion. Law enforcement then returned to the field to find the youngest victim. A manhunt for the assailant ensued for years. Newspaper clippings shared leads and provided suspect sketches from what the girls relayed to artists. A police detective in one news article stated the picture matched the description of a suspect known for abducting and raping girls from East Side schools. The Marion County Sheriff at the time detailed 12 detectives to the case. In December 1975, roughly 4 months after the attacks, Marion County prosecutors told the Daily Reporter that they had identified a Homer man as a suspect, but no charges had been brought. The search continued, but the case eventually turned cold. Steve Gibbs, at the time a detective sergeant with the Marion County Sheriff's Office, picked up the cold case and described the assailant this way in an interview in 2018. "He was hunting," he said. "I would hate to use the word professional, but he was a hunter of victims. Once you're in his car, it's like being caught in a spider web. There's no getting out." On January 9th, 2019, the women got their DNA swabbed after Sergeant David Ellison picked the case. The women went to the city-county building to get their DNA collected to compare against evidence. Without sharing details, Indianapolis police said in a news release that DNA is how they were led to the suspect after Indianapolis police partnered with AudioChuck and DNA Labs International. Addressing the 3 women, Deputy Chief Kendall Adams of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department said, "I won't pretend to know what you're feeling today, but I do hope this is the first step in providing what closure the criminal justice system can." During the news conference, Mrs. Rotlertrick said that she had decided to forgive Mr. Williams for the attack. "I'm sorry if that makes anybody mad," she said. The last of the 3 women to speak was Mrs. Smith. She said that the identification of Mr. Williams had brought her closure and had brought her family justice. "It's put peace within my heart," she said. The cold cases of two East Bay women who were murdered and sexually assaulted 7 years apart in the 1970s in eerily similar circumstances, home intrusions while other family members were asleep, now have a suspect. A man who died in 2007, linked by DNA genealogy analysis to the victims. Hayward and Newark police announced Thursday that Fred Bernard Farnham, who died at the age of 73 in Oregon, was responsible for the slayings of Nellie Ann Hicks in 1972 in Newark and Teresa Pica in Hayward in 1979. Both women were found by family members who woke up in the morning to discover their loved ones' bodies bludgeoned and raped. An intruder had quietly entered their homes and attacked them as they slept in their living rooms. DNA evidence retrieved from Pica's body had been analyzed multiple times in the past 2 decades, and several people who were investigated as possible assailants were excluded from suspicion. The remains of one potential suspect, identified through the same process that found Farnham, were exhumed 2 years ago and later excluded through DNA comparison to the crime scene evidence. That man, however, was on the same genealogical tree, police said. Then this past December, Hayward and Newark investigators again consulted with the FBI and contracted with the Texas-based genealogy forensics company, Othram and Santa Cruz-based Estrella Forensics, to reevaluate the DNA. The results led to Farnham being identified as the killer. Officials say Farnham is likely to be suspected in other unsolved murders and have alerted law enforcement in an array of other jurisdictions to revisit their cold cases for possible connections. The search for answers is not over. Hayward Police Chief Brian Matthews said at a news conference at Hayward City Hall, "We believe Farnham may be responsible for additional sexual assaults and murders in other communities." Matthews then outlined Farnham's geographical path through life, growing up in the Central Valley, then moving to the South Bay in the 1950s, and being convicted there for multiple sexual assaults in the 1970s. There is no indication he ever lived in the East Bay. He also lived in Nevada, Idaho, North Dakota, Alaska, and Oregon, where he died in the town of Cape Junction. Hicks, a 59-year-old 4th-grade teacher at Ashland School in San Lorenzo, was found dead May 10, 1972, in her Newark home. Her body was partially naked, and police determined that she had been raped and bludgeoned with a brick wrapped in pantyhose. The brutality was immediately apparent, with her head split open by the force of the blows. Evidence at the scene indicated that her killer entered the home through an unlocked sliding glass door and used manicure scissors to cut her dress and bra. The only forensic evidence that police recovered were fingerprints that, for decades, were never tied to a specific person. What made the killing even more notorious is the fact that Hicks' adult son and his wife, as well as her longtime friend, all lived in the home and were asleep as the slaying unfolded. That led police to suspect that the intruder knocked her unconscious before sexually assaulting her. A motive for the killing eluded everyone who knew Hicks, who was remembered as a well-liked, respected teacher. She left an abusive husband a decade prior, but that thread and interrogations of other men she dated proved fruitless in finding a possible suspect. Hicks' housemate, a fellow teacher, briefly spoke with her around 1 a.m. the morning of the killing, dozing off on a living room sofa. It was the last time she was seen alive. About 4 hours later, Hicks' son discovered her lifeless body in the same room. Hicks' wallet was missing, though it was later found a few blocks away next to a pair of blood-stained panties. David Hicks, the youngest of Nellie Hicks' 6 children and one of 3 still alive. The son who found the victim died over the holidays, thanked authorities who persisted to find closure in the 52-year-old cold case. Hicks called his mother a hero who raised a family of 6, and she worked full-time as a teacher. "I cannot express my gratitude enough for the police department and their dedication to this case. All of them worked extremely hard to bring closure to our family." Pica, 48, was discovered slumped over her couch, face down, by one of her twin 10-year-old daughters on May 15, 1979, at their home on Edlow Drive in Hayward. Her nightgown had been pulled up, exposing her legs. Her hands were bound behind her back with rope, and a blood-stained rock was found next to her. A shirt had been used to gag her, police found. She was last seen alive the night before by her 3 children. A front room window had been pried open, and the only witness account of an intruder came from a neighbor who heard rustling near the home in the middle of the night. Pika's purse was missing, and her wallet and other contents were later discovered in a neighbor's yard and in a garbage can down the street. Several people were investigated in the ensuing decades, but no suspects emerged until now. In a statement read aloud at the news conference, Pika's daughters similarly voiced relief at the resolution provided by Farnham's identification. "Our mother may now rest peacefully," the statement reads. "We have accepted the fact that whoever did this would never come to justice. Nevertheless, we thank God for your diligence and for never giving up. We can now move forward and close this painful chapter in our lives." Newark Police Captain Jolie Macias said after Pika was killed. Newark and Hayward police linked the crimes because of the discernible pattern of behavior shared by the 2 cases, which drove the belief that figuring out one case would solve the other. She also made a point to reciprocate the sentiments from the victims' survivors. "Today is truly about these families and their resiliency for the past 50-plus years," she said. Anyone with information about criminal cases that could have connections to Farnham can contact Hayward Police Detective Rob Purnell at 510-293-7176. Nevada law enforcement officials announced Wednesday, January 31st, the closure of 2 cold cases after advancements in DNA technology linked a man to murders in both Las Vegas and Westminster, Colorado, nearly 16 years apart. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police said during a press conference that in May 1991, officers responded to reports of a suspicious death inside an apartment on the 1000 block of Monroe Avenue. The officers met with a friend and a relative of 31-year-old Sherry Bridgewater, who had just found her dead inside her apartment. The Homicide Division took over the case because of the suspicious nature of how Bridgewater's body was found, and an autopsy found she was sexually assaulted and murdered by strangulation. The homicide investigation team worked the case relentlessly over the years to solve the case, but unfortunately, it remained unsolved. In 2013, the department submitted a sexual assault kit obtained during the investigation for DNA examination. The DNA exam allowed detectives to develop a suspect profile of the person believed to have killed Bridgewater, though they could not put a name with the DNA profile. After entering the profile, detectives received a hit in the Cody's database that linked them to a second unsolved murder in Westminster, Colorado from December 1975. Detectives with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department immediately began collaborating with the Westminster Police Department, where they learned a woman named Therese Becker was found dead in a field. An autopsy conducted on Becker discovered she was sexually assaulted and died by strangulation. Both agencies had the same suspect profile, but at that time, the technology was not available to identify who the suspect was unless they obtained DNA from the suspect. Therese Becker was last seen December 4, 1975, hitchhiking to see her boyfriend in Brighton, Colorado. 2 days later, her body was found dumped in a field outside Denver. Becker had grown up in Casper, Wyoming, and after she graduated from high school, she moved to metropolitan Denver. 2 passing motorcyclists discovered Becker in the area of 100th Avenue and Lowell Boulevard in Westminster, about 10 miles north of Denver, along with her clothes and personal items, local police said. An autopsy determined she had been raped and died by asphyxiation, the Westminster Police Department said. Over the past 5 decades, investigators have returned to the case again and again. Finally, 48 years later, the mystery of her killer has been solved thanks to DNA technology and genetic genealogy. In 2018, both agencies worked together to submit the cases for forensic genealogy, in which the DNA from the suspect was sent to a lab and then to a company in Denver, Colorado. 4 years later, in 2022, detectives were able to identify the suspect as Thomas Martin Elliott. Westminster Police said Elliott had spent a large portion of his life in and out of prison. Before Becker's 1975 murder, he committed a burglary in Lakewood, Colorado. He was convicted and spent 6 years in prison. He moved throughout the correction system and was released from prison in Las Vegas in 1981. After his release, he proceeded to commit a crime against a child and was sentenced to 10 more years behind bars, police said. He was released again in Las Vegas in 1991, then committed the Las Vegas apartment murder police used to create his DNA profile. Not long after this homicide, for unknown reasons, Thomas Elliott committed suicide on October 30th, 1991. The investigation conducted by both police agencies placed Elliott in Colorado at the time of Becker's murder in Westminster, Colorado, and in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1991, at the time of Bridgewater's murder. In November 1991, Elliott was pronounced dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Las Vegas. He was later buried at a local cemetery in Las Vegas. While Elliott was identified as the suspect, detectives were not 100% sure until they were able to obtain DNA from his body. With the cost of exhuming a body being pricey, both police agencies worked together and approached the Vegas Justice League to help fund the exhumation of Elliott to obtain DNA. Elliott's remains were exhumed, and detectives were able to obtain tissue and bone samples, which were submitted to a lab. While at the lab, a DNA sample was extracted and compared to both cases. The results were both 100% matches, police said. On September 21, 1987, an Isle of Wight sheriff's deputy on nighttime patrol found 20-year-old David Nobling's Ford Ranger pickup truck abandoned at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. Doors closed but unlocked, driver's side window down, and its radio left playing with no one inside. 2 days later, a beachcomber found the bodies of Nobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards on Ragged Island's shoreline, roughly a mile from the James River Bridge. Both had been shot in the back of the head at close range. The case stayed cold for 36 years. According to state police spokeswoman Corinne Geller, Wilmer had been one of several suspects investigators had considered over the decades, and upon learning of Wilmer's 2017 death, were able to posthumously obtain a genetic sample to compare to DNA preserved from the crime scene. Last summer, the Virginia Department of Forensic Science issued a certificate of analysis confirming a genetic match to Alan Wilmer Sr., Geller said at a January 8th press conference held at the state police's regional headquarters in Suffolk. The sample obtained from Wilmer's body also proved a match to DNA belonging to the killer of 29-year-old Teresa Spahowell, who was found raped and murdered in 1989 in the city of Hampton. According to Hampton Police Captain Rebecca Warren, Howell was last seen alive on July 1st of that year, a Saturday at 2:30 a.m. at the former Zodiac Club, which had been a popular night spot off Mercury Boulevard. Roughly 8 hours later, construction workers found female clothing at the edge of the woods off Butler Farm Road and eventually came upon an unidentified woman's remains. Police identified the remains as Howell's and determined the cause of death to be strangulation after her family filed a missing person report in York County 3 days later. Articles of Robin's clothing had also been left near the Ragged Island crime scene in Nobling's truck. Robin's older sister, Jeanette Edwards Santiago, had recounted other similarities in a 2022 interview with the Smithfield Times ahead of the then Unsolved Crimes 35th anniversary. The then 19-year-old Santiago had been living on her own when she received a phone call from her parents on September 19, 1987, another Saturday, asking whether she'd seen Robin that evening. She answered, "No." "I didn't think a whole lot of it at the time because she had run away a couple months previously and was gone for 2 weeks," Santiago said, noting Robin hadn't been on speaking terms with her since she'd told on her sister for having ridden her bicycle from their parents' house in Newport News All the way to the Coleman Memorial Bridge in York County. As Santiago recalled from her mother's account, Robin had arranged a date with Nobling's cousin Jason on September 19th, which would become the last time anyone saw David or Robin alive. Jason, David, and David's brother, Michael, had shown up at the Edwards home in David's Ford Ranger to take Robin to a movie that ended up being sold out. The four went to an arcade instead, dropping Robin back at her parents' house around 10 p.m. Once home, Robin put her younger sister, Pam, to bed, but went back out later that night with David. Why the two ended up traveling all the way across the James River Bridge to Ragged Island, and whether they did so willingly, remains a mystery. Police didn't elaborate at the press conference on whether or how Wilmer knew his victims. For 36 years, our families have lived in a vacuum of the unknown. Representatives from the Nobling and Edwards families said in a joint statement, "We have lived with the fear of worrying that a person capable of deliberately killing Robin and David could attack and claim another victim. Now we have a sense of relief and justice, knowing that he can no longer victimize another. We're not saying these cases are closed. They're resolved for right now, because we know there's a lot more work to do," Geller said. "The next task," she said, "is to try and piece together a timeline of Wilmer's life to identify if there were any other victims." Alan Wilmer, 63 at the time of his 2017 death in Lancaster, was 32 and working as a commercial fisherman at the time of the Ragged Island murders. He owned and frequently lived aboard a 1976 fishing boat named the Denny Wade, which he would dock at marinas in Gloucester and Middlesex counties and throughout Hampton Roads. He was known to drive several trucks, including a distinctive 1966 blue Dodge Fargo pickup, with the custom license plate EMRAW, a possible reference to his farming mainly clams and oysters. According to Geller, Wilmer was also known by the nickname Pokey. He also ran a tree service and was an avid hunter. Geller declined to elaborate on how and when police began to suspect Wilmer of either crime. Part of the cold case philosophy is to go back over, to start re-looking and going back through all the witness statements, all the evidence, and it's a very time-consuming, very complex, but very effective way, Geller said. Because Wilmer's criminal record didn't include any felonies. Police didn't have his DNA on file and weren't able to obtain a sample to test until after learning of his 2017 death. Wilmer, Geller said, was one of several suspects whose recently obtained DNA was submitted for analysis. Wilmer's family, in a written statement distributed at the press conference, said news of the DNA match came as a complete and horrific shock. "The man who committed these crimes was not someone we knew," the family's statement reads. "The revelation of what he's done has deeply impacted our family as we are forced to reconcile who we believed him to be with the unimaginable things he has done. We deeply mourn the victims' families and the community and have them in our prayers. We can't imagine what they've gone through for all these years. Let us know if you knew Wilmer, how you knew him, what encounters you had so we can build that timeline and find out if, in fact, there are other victims out there," Geller urged the public. Former Isle of Wight County Sheriff Charlie Phelps, who inherited the Ragged Island case upon his taking office in January 1988, told The Times in 2022 that he long suspected a different man, Samuel Reeder, whom the new DNA evidence appears to clear of the crime. A few months into his first term as sheriff, Phelps had been investigating the reported theft of several firearms from an Isle of Wight woman's home and came to suspect the woman's son. The son, Phelps told The Times, ended up confessing to taking a gun from his mother's home and selling it at a pawn shop in Mississippi, but then began talking about a roommate, Reeder, who'd lived with him and his mother in Isle of Wight. According to Blaine Pardoe's and Victoria Hester's 2017 book, A Special Kind of Evil, The Colonial Parkway Serial Killings, then 28-year-old Ryder had called in one of the original tips the sheriff's office had received when investigating David's and Robin's initial disappearance. As Phelps recalled, Reeder initially claimed to have stopped at Ragged Island out of curiosity on September 23, 1987, when David's and Robin's bodies were found. Then later claimed to have seen Nobling's truck parked at Ragged Island days earlier. Reeder's final version of events, Phelps recalled, was that he had taken money out of Nobling's wallet, which had been left in the truck, but denied having anything to do with David's or Robin's deaths. In a 2022 report on the then unsolved Ragged Island case, a copy of Reeder's death certificate states he was found dead in his Chesapeake mobile home the morning of August 8, 1990, hanging from a doorknob with an electrical cord around his neck. He was 31 at the time of his death. In the early morning hours of August 13, 2005, Rodriguez broke into a home, took a knife from the kitchen, and entered a bedroom where a 21-year-old woman was sleeping. He held the knife to her throat and attempted to sexually assault her. Rodriguez briefly moved the knife during the attack, and the woman was able to wrestle the weapon away. Mills County Sheriff Anthony Poole says it was a case that left the entire county shaken up. Sheriff Poole said, "This doesn't happen at all in this county." After a brief altercation, Sheriff Poole says the suspect fled the scene, but the suspect did leave behind a single drop of blood. It was a key piece of evidence collected by the Mills County Sheriff's Office, but not much could be done with it without the proper technology. The only thing left for investigators to do with it was to upload it to the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS. The case went cold for almost 2 decades. To have something like this happen, it shocked all the residents of the county, and to have it just sit there for almost 20 years just having evidence sitting here. It was a frustrating thing for everybody involved, said Sheriff Poole. Sheriff Poole says the Texas Rangers met with the office in 2021 and did a familial DNA search on the drop of blood. This was new technology made possible by the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, or SAKI, a federal grant for advanced DNA testing. They actually came back with a familial hit on it, he said. Sheriff Poole says former sheriff and lead investigator Clint Hammonds was able to test a pair of gloves and get an exact match. The match was 41-year-old Jesse Rodriguez. Rodriguez confessed immediately right off the bat and said he was glad that he finally got caught because it's been weighing on him for the last 18 years. Rodriguez said he broke into the home of the victim and tried to sexually assault her, but during the attempt, he was injured with a knife and fled the scene. Jesse Rodriguez of Zephyr pleaded guilty to attempted aggravated sexual assault of an adult and was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Sheriff Poole says it was a huge win for the county. The Texas Rangers released a statement saying this could not have been done without the DNA collected by Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and the help of Department of Public Safety Crime Lab forensic scientists in Waco, Garland, and Austin. Just makes you proud to help the public and serve your communities, said Sheriff Poole. The major cold case break was announced by the Texas Rangers just 1 day shy of Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. "We owe them at least this day to thank them," Send them positive thoughts and good wishes," said Charlie Wilkinson, Executive Director of Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas. Wilkinson says every day should be Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, but because it is not, he says it is important to thank them for all they do to make sure the public is safe. A man was indicted by a local grand jury on murder and burglary charges in the cold case killing of a Buckholes High School student that occurred 13 years ago. Alachua County Sheriff Emery Gainey and 8th Circuit State Attorney Brian Kramer announced the indictment of Timothy Thomas, 33, during a news conference Monday, February 5th. In the early morning hours of June 25, 2010, Sebastian Oxenius, 16, was playing video games with a neighbor at his home in the Benwood subdivision of Gainesville. Oxenius went to the kitchen, where he encountered a burglar who shot him multiple times. His family rushed to the kitchen and called 911. Oxenius was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics. His brother, Boris Oxenius, said during the press conference, "We hope as a family that you can help us get to the final chapter of this, which is bringing my brother justice." He was only 16 years of age. His life was stolen. Deputies believe the car Thomas used in 2010 was borrowed from a female friend who is believed to have been inside the car while the murder occurred. While deputies do not believe she had prior knowledge of Thomas's plans that night, Gainey encouraged anyone with information to come forward. The woman is believed to have been 20, Hispanic and short with a heavy build. The vehicle is described as a white or cream Kia Sportage or similar model. "I know this has been a long and difficult road. We're making some progress, but we also understand it's not over yet. Rest assured, we'll be with you every step of the way," Gainey said during the news conference. In 2021, new evidence emerged that led to the identification of Timothy Thomas as a suspect. Thomas is currently serving a life sentence for the 2015 attempted murder of a Monroe County Sheriff's deputy in Stock Island, Florida. Thomas has a long criminal record with 23 felony charges and 8 misdemeanors. He has been arrested by multiple law enforcement agencies for battery, burglary, and attempted murder across the state, which includes arrests from the Key West Police Department to various Central Florida agencies. In 2015, Thomas was pulled over in Monroe County for driving with a stolen tag. A video played during Monday's press conference showed a firefight between Thomas and the deputy, who was shot in the chest but saved by his duty-issued body armor. Thomas was indicted December 23rd by an Alachua County grand jury on 1 count of murder while engaged in trafficking and 1 count of armed burglary. The indictment remains sealed, according to court records. His arraignment was held Monday morning at the Alachua County Courthouse, and Thomas is being held at the Alachua County Jail on a $1 million bond. Thomas's court-appointed public defender asked to withdraw from the case Monday, citing an unnamed and irreconcilable conflict of interest. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by subscribing and liking the video, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.